Transferable skills.
From Cackle Media, this is Transferable Skills. I'm Noah Mishkin. Today's guest is Emily Safier, who shares her skills journey from physical therapist into customer success. I hope you enjoy. Emily Safier, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Noah. I'm happy to be here.
Tell me where your mind was early on.
I come from some tech executives, but growing up, my mom actually started a customer success org. She was a tech executive, a very hard worker. And I always said I didn't want to be in business. I wanted to stay home. I wanted to wait for my kids to come home from school and be a stay-at-home mom. I was maybe rebelling a little bit against what I had. And I always said I didn't want to be in business. I have no interest in that. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Come junior year of high school, I took an anatomy class, and it really changed the trajectory of my life because I found something that was actually interesting to me. We did a dissection. I think it was like a pig heart. And I was,
fetal pig?
Yes. I was like, I need to do more of this. And from then on out, I really started focusing on how do I get into medicine and what type of medicine do I want to get into? I did some shadowing of surgeons at that time, like family, friends, and yeah.
This is in high school?
In high school. I grew up in a family where it's like work is worth in a lot of ways. And I never had that. I never knew what I wanted to do. And once I got interested in something, I really dove in head first. Yeah, I remember I shadowed a cardiac surgeon, family friend in high school for one of his surgeries. So
it wasn't just peds or internals. You were like really deep. You're like, I'm going to go heavy.
I was like, I need to see the inside of the body. Yeah, that's what I needed.
Totally. You're shadowing this doctor. You're thinking about medicine. Did you pursue that in college?
Yeah, I went to college in a kinesiology track focusing on the human body. And at that point, I knew I wanted to be a physical therapist, but I didn't really know what type. But I was really taking all the kinesiology courses and prereqs to get into physical therapy school. And my junior year, I went to Australia. And before I went abroad, I had a 2-month break. And I got a volunteer role at the Rehab Institute of Chicago, now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, which is like the #1 neuro rehab hospital in the world. And I met this one physical therapist who took me under her wing. And I spent, I think it was full days, 3 days a week for about a month and a half there. And I just fell in love. I was like, this is what I need to do. This is what my calling is. I'm meant to be here. And from then on out, really my trajectory was not just physical therapy, but I need to work at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, this #1 rehab hospital, and I will do everything I can to make that happen.
I love that because you were inspired and moved by an experience, but it wasn't just a general, I need to go into this. You set a goal on specifically where I want to be, where I want to end up. And so now I'm going to plan everything that it takes to get there. I'm curious, though, the logic, the thought process that went into your early interest and curiosity about inside the body to really focusing on providing therapy services mostly to the outside of the body. So how did you go from this curiosity and interest in medicine from a surgery standpoint into PT?
What I did in physical therapy was actually neuro. So it was all brain injury, spinal cord injury, stroke, amputations, MS. And so it actually really was all based inside the body. While I wasn't working inside the body, everything I was doing was based off the knowledge of what was happening in these organs and how that impacted what we saw externally, but it was all from the internal.
You're providing services to the outside of the body to address things that are typically on the inside of the body, but you're going deeper. That's an intense field to be in. Obviously, intellectually and cognitively, but emotionally, that's a really hard field to be in.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's also impactful. I knew that every day I was improving somebody's life to a very intense degree. And yeah, I met people a lot of times at the hardest time in their life. High schoolers who are now quadriplegic, people with severe brain injuries, people in comas. I felt like when people were working with me or with us in general as neurophysical therapists, we're working towards getting them better, no matter what that looks like. If that just means moving a finger, if that just means moving their eyes or learning how to teach people how to help them, we were the ones who could help start turning their lives back around. It was honestly an honor. Were they angry?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. Some of that was actually from potentially a brain injury, depending on where the brain was injured. It could cause aggression that may not have been in their normal being before that. Sometimes it was a spinal cord injury and they were just pissed. I definitely dealt with that a good amount. I got thick skin for being yelled at, especially for patients with brain injuries who had an excuse where it was really coming from the inside, like you said.
Mhm.
At the same time, a lot of people were just like wanting to learn and in this really vulnerable place where they were starting from almost nothing and no understanding and were anxious and excited to learn how to start getting better.
And I'm sure you also dealt with those that you wonder how they find that optimism, that hope. There's some people that, despite the challenges that they've been presented with, that they have this optimism and hope that you wonder how strong could they possibly be? Where do they get this from? And that's an inspiration to people.
It also really ingrained like the importance of community and support. And I had patients who had zero of that, and I had patients who had a ton of that, and the outcomes look different. The experience looks different.
And the reality is this moment is directly impacting this person for the first time ever. They've never been through this before. It could even be a somewhat superficial and very recoverable condition or injury. But to this person, it's life-changing for now. And it's hard to sometimes see past this current status, this injury.
Absolutely. You work with the spectrum, right? You work with kids who had maybe a minor brain injury and they'll make a full recovery, and the parents are understandably frantic and so concerned. And then you work with kids who are fully quadriplegic and will never recover. And you provide the same care and the same empathy and education to everybody. And I think the hardest thing when it comes to differences in people came down to financial abilities and support, because when somebody has a severe injury, accident, impairment, having financial support in the state of our world and insurance, which is a whole nother story, but that makes a huge difference. And I think that was the hardest thing sometimes to have to navigate in healthcare.
A lot of times our biggest concern is how are we going to afford this rehab or this hospital stay when you really want to be ideally focusing just on recovery. It's a sad reality. We've all been in a situation where we've had to use insurance one way or another. And it's always been that question before you submit your insurance is, are they going to accept it? How much is covered? What is my copay? What is my out of pocket? And the patients that you were seeing, I imagine, are probably going to be at the height of those costs.
We have so many resources in this world, private caregivers, private exercise facilities that focus on neuro impairments, but it's all out of pocket. Sometimes it's so much easier to get equipment for patients who have Medicaid actually than other insurances. For me, it was like each person was just my person, right? Like each of my patients were like my family, my friends. We connected so deeply with our patients and spent so much time with them in these vulnerable states that it was unbelievable sometimes what insurance couldn't see or really had their hands tied. But for me, like you were saying before about how everyone's struggle is their own struggle and it's real, that's how I felt about every patient of mine.
Totally. Being a patient advocate is your number one priority. And therefore, by way of your advocacy and considerations and care, you're giving the service and providing the therapy and the rehab to those patients to the best of your ability. And earlier, you mentioned a skill, thick skin. How did you use that essentially to your advantage, both in your PT life and maybe even outside in your personal life?
We learned a lot of self-defense, and because we had physically aggressive patients as well who we had to restrain. I think in healthcare in general, people are upset when they're in these moments and you just can't take it personally. I know this conversation is shifting into what I'm doing now. When I was interviewing for jobs as a customer success manager, it was something I talked about, de-escalating situations and how important that was in PT at a very like in-person, in the moment, super intense moment, but how that also translates into de-escalating customers where maybe there was a product issue or something else that you need to stay focused on. What is the joint goal here? And what are we trying to accomplish? And with my patients, it was a lot of empathy, but also igniting the fire underneath them, because if it was just empathy, I wouldn't be doing my job. And if it was just igniting a fire, then I wouldn't be able to build relationships to do the job as best as I could.
Can you describe what customer service, customer success, customer care is?
My role as customer success at my org is different than customer service. The differences are our customer service team is taking like all inbound technical questions related to the platform. My role as a customer success manager is that I have a book of business of about 70 plus customers, and I really am their strategic partner. So I work with them to understand their key business and people team priorities in order to then map out and align on success metrics to make sure that they're getting the most value out of the platform.
Customer success in what you are describing is a book of business, and you say about 70 customers. And your role is to be their go-to person at the company that they know they can always count on, rely on, reach out to. And part of your role is to respond to their needs, but also, I would assume, based on how you described it, to proactively seek out opportunities that they are not aware of yet, that they haven't taken advantage of.
Exactly. Yeah. My goal is that they renew, that their execs know the value of what we're offering them, and that it's an easy renewal decision because they're already so ingrained in our platform. They love the output that they're getting from it. And they love the value that I bring to them also as their strategic partner. One of the best pieces of feedback I receive is when my customers tell me, like, we feel like you're part of our team. Like, when we have a question, we go to you as like how we'd go to our teammates for strategy decisions. Like, we go to you as the expert in that. So I frame to people that I want to be not just their implementation manager, but their strategic partner. So I definitely use that language and do what I can to dig in deep with them and their executives about, like, what are your business objectives right now? What are your people objectives right now? So that I understand their business and then I can provide that.
What percentage of the people that you ask that to have an answer versus you trying to dig it out and get them to identify those goals that they maybe not were aware of?
Such a good question. I usually give people a heads up prior to our strategy calls and let them know I'm going to be asking that.
Oh, that's nice.
Based off
in an email?
Yeah, in an email. I'd say about only 5% come with nothing. And if I ask for objectives, they'll be like, what? But the way I frame it is really, what are your priorities? And then I put those into objectives and create a success plan for them. That's an initiative through Culture Amp that we have this success plan template that aligns their business priorities, people, team priorities, and then what are our goals moving forward with Culture Amp. The day I meet a customer on my kickoff with them, I schedule on the calendar a 6-month strategy call, and I put it on the calendar and I invite them. It's really for accountability, not for them to be thinking about it in the meantime, but to make sure that touch point isn't missed, because that touch point is where we are able to understand risk, understand maybe they've implemented something that could cause risk for renewal. That's where the transparency sometimes comes out. So I get it on the calendar more for accountability to make sure we already have this touch point. If you cancel on me, we're going to reschedule because it's already on the calendar. Versus them preparing for it in any way.
It's like when you're done at the dentist, you immediately make your appointment for 6 months later.
That is exactly right.
Yes. Let's talk about touch points. So for those listening that are unfamiliar, touch point might be a cadence or a moment where you're having communication with your customer. Can you talk a little bit about touch points? What does it mean? And what is the purpose of a touch point with a customer?
Totally. Yeah. Touch points are so important. And if people don't see the value in what you're providing, they will decline your outreach. At Culture Amp, actually, right now, we're going through a whole org transformation where we've split our role into different parts, and our touch points are actually changing as we speak right now. But typically, my points would be getting people set up, building the strategy behind what they're going to be doing. So we do engagement surveys, we do performance reviews, development plans. We train organizations on how to use our software to provide those things for their employees to really improve culture and experience and productivity. So for me, my touch points are making sure I understand, especially for my larger accounts, what's upcoming, what is your strategy for this? And then maybe here are some improvements we've made recently that would be helpful for you. Or here's what the latest research says on this, that maybe you can incorporate values into your performance reviews. So what I do is I have a cadence through our systems where I make sure that I have next steps for every customer of mine, even if they're 2 months out, 3 months out, so that I know when to strategically reach out. In our touch points, we have our strategy discussions that I've already talked about. And then we have discussions for the actual launches. I pride myself on attention to detail. So I really like to dig in and look through every detail and make sure that everything is exactly how they want it. Because what you don't want is a customer to launch something with a mistake and then there's no way to change it later. And then that leads to risk. So,
okay, great moment. You expect your customers to be somewhat prepared for your meetings. I'm curious what kind of preparation you do before that meeting.
Yeah, it depends. For the strategy calls, that's where I'm doing my most prep work. I'm looking them up in the news. I'm looking at their LinkedIns. I'm looking at their whole platform, what they're utilizing, what they're not. I'm really going into the call of, here were the previous priorities we talked about for you and your business. Have those changed? And if they have, then we need to realign what we're doing here. And if they haven't, then how can we improve on what we're doing?
Do you ever call them out for being lazy or bullshit, because I think sometimes as humans, we often have an instinct to be defensive. So if you say, here's where your goals were, and I don't believe, according to what I'm hearing, it doesn't sound like you're achieving your goals or working towards achieving your goals. What can we do about that? Do you ever call them out and say, I don't think you're living your own truth? You're saying something, but you're doing something different.
Yeah, it's funny. That kind of relates to both physical therapy actually and customer success. In physical therapy, when we talked about a thick skin, one thing I learned was like, all I can do is educate and recommend and educate the people around that person to support them. But ultimately, I'm not that person. And so I really learned to be strong with my recommendations and make sure they understand their decision. But ultimately, it was the patient's decision. In customer success, I think I'm learning how to be a little more, not forceful, but
honest, transparent.
No,
blunt?
Because I was honest and transparent and blunt in both. But now I really need them to make the change, right? I need them to adopt more to help them and also to help my role.
You need to have built a relationship on trust and therefore a familiarity where you can be a little bit more informal and personal and say, I'm not just going to use business jargon. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I don't have to be aggressive in my feedback, but I can certainly be critical.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm not an aggressive person by nature. I will never be that aggressive salesperson. However, in both physical therapy and here, I am very comfortable being honest and transparent. I think when it came to physical therapy, this was like somebody's life and them choosing either to do something or not, or to drive when they shouldn't or not, or different things. And in customer success and business, I need to also really drive home what needs to happen. And it's not as much like their life, their choice. It's a business decision, and that's different. And so the way that I frame my recommendations has been evolving over time and is going to continue to evolve in business versus healthcare.
Yeah. What led to your decision to get out of physical therapy and then seek this new opportunity? Can you help me understand what led to the path of that change?
I think that's the question I get asked the most is like, how did you do this and how can I do this? There's a lot of people in healthcare, unfortunately, looking to get out for similar reasons to me. Basically, I had my first son in December of 2019, meaning that I went back to work March 12th, 2020, right when COVID hit. And I went back to the hospital and the world shut down and I was going in every day. And it was really impactful at that time still. I still, to this day, loved what I did as a physical therapist, like the impact working in the hospitals. These patients really became like family. Some of them I still keep in touch with today. I look others up just to see what they're doing. I really built strong relationships. And when COVID hit, the world changed, right? And the business world became more remote. And there became this huge discrepancy between the flexibility that I got as a physical therapist working with patient care every day and what people in the business world got, even to go to a dentist appointment, right? My husband's a middle school math teacher, and so he also doesn't have that flexibility. Also, with physical therapy, there's not much room for financial growth within what I was doing. So, of course, people are like, what if you went and started your own home healthcare like practice? And totally, I could do that with the education that I have. However, like, I would rather do what I'm doing now. In physical therapy, what I did was so specialized. And if I was doing physical therapy, that's what I wanted to be doing. And there really wasn't room for financial growth. And same with teaching, right? There's not those big bumps in pay. There's not those bonuses. There's not the year over year development where you can grow into new roles. It's like you could be a manager, you could go into healthcare administration, but you can't really do what I was doing and get the growth. With that differential now between the business world and what I was doing, I started to think about like our life and how hard it was during COVID when your kid had a sniffle, they had to come home from school. And am I leaving my patients? Is my husband leaving his students last minute? It just became really clear that maybe something had to give for us. And then I had my second son in 2022. And during maternity leave, I started just exploring what was out there. And I actually ended up having, I think, about 40 networking calls during that time, learning about business.
You were already thinking about this. Not only were you doing the research, but you were networking.
And interviewing.
Doing the work and interviewing. You were doing the work. You were already on that path towards change.
Yes. And that was in 2022. And also like my family support really helped, right?
Yeah.
My brother's a tech executive. My mom has all this experience. I also leveraged them to at least understand more and more what like day to day would look like. Maybe what avenues should I look into? And as I learned more about customer success, I realized like how transferable the skills were, honestly, and how I could pitch that and what my day would look like where I would still be meeting with people. I wouldn't do well being in a company where I'm doing data entry all day. I want to be using my brain to make strategic decisions to help guide people, to be meeting with people and influencing. And so, yeah, the more I learned, the more I was like, I think I could do this. And the more I saw the salaries and I saw the work from home and the lifestyle changes that I was able to get from it. So yeah, I heavily networked and learned as much as I could. And I interviewed. And when I look back to like my interview prep doc from my first interview, like it's quite embarrassing. And I iterated over
tell me
time. Yeah, I'll tell you like the big picture, because this people ask this a lot. I've had a lot of calls with people on LinkedIn who've reached out to me because they also want to move into this. And what I tell them is when I first started interviewing, I would talk about, here's what I do as a physical therapist and what I do is different. And I'm in neuro and here's the intensity of the decision making. And then here's why I want to be a customer success manager because I want to influence the tech world. It was choppy.
Yeah.
And
these were choppy and they were essentially two separate things.
Exactly. So I was getting through like the recruiter screen because I usually had referrals from my networking. And then I wouldn't get past it, or I'd get to one more round and I would just be told like we have other candidates. And as we all know, the job market has been hard to get into in general. So I knew it would just take the right person. And maybe like, I don't know, 6 months of doing this on and off, I had an interview and they came back and told me like their feedback was that they really needed someone who had like higher experience of multitasking. And that was really eye-opening to me because I was like, wow, I am not explaining what I'm doing, because even now doing this role for over a year and a half, what I did in physical therapy was much harder in a lot of ways. And it took much higher multitasking, prioritization, accountability. It was much harder to do those things at a much higher level in physical therapy. So I realized I'm not explaining how these skills are transferable at all.
That's interesting that you recognize that. You weren't getting far past the gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. You were always getting disqualified at a certain point, and you attributed that to you're not explaining it well enough. Yeah. I like that you were so like aware of that.
I realized that from that feedback of multitasking. I was like, wow, they just don't get it. And that's on me because I'm not doing a good job. So from that, I flipped the switch completely. And I see my interview notes from pre that time to post that time. And what I did was when they say, tell me about yourself, like the most common recruiter question, I would say for the past 6 years, I've been working in a hospital with patients with brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, and strokes. But what I really want to focus on today are the key skills that will make me the most successful customer success manager at your organization. And I would say what I know about customer success, what I've heard over and over is de-escalating situations and providing empathy while also a solution are two of the most challenging things for customer success managers in tech. And here's how I've been doing those things every day and mastering those skills.
Brilliant. Almost like a litigator. You took the question and you were able to both address the question while also driving the narrative in the direction that you wanted it to go, and then filling in exactly how you were going to describe to them the correlation, the connection, and how that had transferable skills to make you most successful in that role. Brilliant. Fantastic.
Exactly. And it's funny you say litigator because my dad, who I haven't talked about yet, is a lawyer. It's all in the blood.
I think you were born into this like perfectly between your mom's background and then your father's background. You're really a wonderful blend between the two skill sets naturally.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So you're interviewing and you said that if you look back at your notes, you can see how you progressed and how you got better. How do you take notes and what is most important when you're documenting how you felt that interview went?
In healthcare, note-taking is essential. People's benefits won't be covered unless you write every detail the way that it needs to be written and describe what's their ongoing need and what are you doing to address it and how are they improving? Because you could have one or two of those three items and insurance will deny.
Were you always detail-oriented like that, or did you become that way being a physical therapist?
For as long as I can remember, I've always been like that. But I don't think as like a teenager, I was so detail-oriented. But yeah, definitely in my professional life, I have always been very detail-oriented and very accountable. And I think documentation in healthcare was not a question. It wasn't a, can you do this better? It was a necessity. And that has really helped me in customer success, where leaders want visibility into what's the risk here? How are we mitigating it? For me, it's natural to write that down.
What does that look like from an interviewing standpoint? What notes are you taking from an interview afterwards?
So my prep notes, I would go through any question you could imagine, and I would write down bullets for what I would say to that, a lot of behavioral questions, and then also a list of patient stories or escalations. I remember being asked specifically about how have you de-escalated a customer who was upset? And I went into detail about a patient of mine who I had a situation. So really storytelling and situations are going to be so important. I was faking it till I made it for a long time.
We all are.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about figuring out, is this the right organization for me too? Is this the right place for me?
What suggestions do you have for somebody going into an interview or an important meeting? I'm curious what your approach is between being overly prepared and detailed and trying to memorize all those questions and answers versus general familiarity with each one and just being comfortable and walking and talking casually.
Yeah, I think it all comes from experience. So when I was first interviewing, and even up until I got my first job offer, I didn't have that experience of customer success to lean on. And so I really felt like in order to have confidence, I needed to be overly prepared. Now that I have experience, my systems are in place. I know what I'm doing and what I'm talking about. And so I don't feel like if I looked for another job that I would have to be that prepared. Same with my work documentation. When I first started, I was doing a lot more preparation before meetings. Whereas now I have the information in my brain, right? I understand the product. I don't need to have all these preparation notes in case they ask a question because usually I know the answer just from experience and knowing the product. So for me, I have to be overly prepared to build confidence to start. And then once it's a part of my everyday, then it's way less preparation.
I want to obviously talk a little bit more about your current role and some of the challenges, some of the skills that you have brought over, things like that.
In terms of my transition over, after months and months of interviewing, a friend's ex-boyfriend was a manager of customer success at a company that I had networked with him 6 months before. And then his company was hiring. And that's what you need, right? That's what I tell people. You need a network enough that you know the right person at the right time. And I interviewed for this health tech startup and got hired there. And I said, all I need is 6 months to prove myself. And then if I get laid off, I know I can get another job. 6 weeks in, our entire team got laid off and they sent all of our customers to Costa Rica to save costs. So I was like, the worst case scenario happened, but I'll tell you, those 6 weeks, I had the most incredible team lead who taught me everything. Interviewing after that was a whole nother game already. And I also learned that with tech, once you're in, so it took me so long to get my first job. I got laid off on a Wednesday. By Friday, I already had 2 interviews lined up and I ended up getting a job within the next 2 weeks after that.
That's a blessing and a wonderful experience. And I hope others share that same one. Not everybody will, but
No.
You're right. Once you're in that ecosystem, your opportunities are far more available and accessible.
I want to say that my experience getting a job that quickly, I also attribute a lot to luck. There are people looking for jobs for a year plus. And I really think for me, it was just timing and luck. And then also the relationships that I had made from the networking I did when I first tried to get in. And that's why relationships in life are so important. You always want to leave people with a good impression because you never know when you can help them or when they can help you.
You get the notice for being laid off, or maybe was it immediate? Were you laid off immediate? Hey, today, pack up, you're done.
So it was 10 o'clock at night and I got a calendar event put on my calendar for 8 a.m. Central the next morning. It said this meeting is mandatory, decline all of our other meetings, including customer meetings at that time. And I called
Classic.
my mom and I was like, hey, I'm getting laid off tomorrow morning. So this should be interesting.
Looking for a job is its own skill that should not be undervalued or underappreciated or underconsidered because it takes different skills to find a job than it does to do the job. So just because you're highly qualified to get the job, you still have to be able to get that interview and to do well on that interview enough to land the job. There's so many skills involved with finding jobs. So you also, in this case, your network was still hot.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. I actually hadn't thought about it in that way before, but you're right. It was really fresh and my leads were hot and I had this fire under me. I was like, I know I need to get a job now. I think I gave myself 4 months at the time. I was still employed PRN at the hospital, which is as needed basis. And I gave myself 4 months before I was like, I'm going to ask them for my job back.
That's another skill to actually mention too, is being your own advocate and PR for your own brand.
When I first was transitioning from physical therapy to customer success, I went onto LinkedIn because my mom was like, oh, go update your LinkedIn. And I had high school basketball player. That was it on my LinkedIn. It was nothing. We don't use LinkedIn in physical therapy. I had definitely under 100 LinkedIn connections. I started connecting with all sorts of people and asking them for a quick chat. And that was a huge part of how I made this happen because, like I said before, I need to over prepare to get that confidence. And so I had to over prepare and make sure I really understood what I was getting into to speak to it.
Could you give me 2 examples of your top favorite systems optimization that you would recommend to somebody asking for that advice?
Oh, sure. I love talking about this. First of all, I'm like an inbox zero girly, in my phone too. Like I can't have ongoing notifications. So my email, all of my customers have a label to them that automatically, every time someone emails me, their label color comes up. I have my unreads on top. After I respond, they go to the bottom, but anything that still needs to be dealt with is like always on top, unread. For my calendar, I send calendar links to customers, but I also block out my preparation time. I block out buffer times between calls so that I make sure that I'm staying accountable to documenting and setting my follow-ups to customers in a good amount of time.
You're a master of your domain. It's great. Very well organized. I like that. Actually, I'm curious, when you talk about these engagements, you're preparing for these calls, you're talking to a customer, you have it scheduled and all that. Are your calls still just audio phone calls, or are you doing video calls with customers?
They're all Zoom. Yeah, we don't use phone at all. I only use phone if I can't get a hold of someone and they're not responding to any of my messages, and then I'll just cold call them. But otherwise, everything's Zoom. There's so many people who think about what they want to do in their life for their career. And what I love about this podcast is it's all about the skills that you have. And being a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, you also have high levels of multitasking and all these other skills, problem solving, escalation management. And it's about really taking a step back from what your current role is and thinking about the competencies that you've achieved and the skills that you achieved. And I really believe that people can move into what either makes them happier or what provides them more work-life balance. And it's about taking that step back. And I've had a lot of these conversations. I love what you're doing. And I think that for me, I miss being a physical therapist. If I'm being honest with myself, I miss my day-to-day work. I miss my patients. I miss my colleagues. I miss the intensity of the environment and the medical side of things and the science, but not enough to give up like the flexibility and financial freedom that I'm getting now. So it's about balance and figuring out what your main value is at this moment in time for you, for your family. And I think this is a really interesting topic, and I love that you're bringing it to light.
Thank you. I'm grateful for you to be here today. I was excited to have you on the show, and you did not disappoint. This has been a fantastic conversation, one that's meaningful to me, and certainly will be very instrumental, helpful, and inspirational to our entire audience. So thank you. From Cackle Media, this is Transferable Skills. I'm Noah Mishkin. Today's guest is Adam Fontana, who shares his skills journey from change management into growth strategy. I hope you enjoy. I want to thank Jacqueline Crawford for recommending Adam as today's guest, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, if you found value in today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe. Thank you for listening, and remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills. So much, Emily, for being here today.
Thank you. Really appreciate you having me.
I want to thank Emily for being today's guest, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.